The airlock hissed shut behind Lieutenant Aaron Cross as he stepped aboard the Varelion flagship Synthesis, and immediately he felt like he'd entered a cathedral made of starlight. The corridors stretched before him in perfect geometric harmony, their walls pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to his presence. Everything was pristine, mathematical, beautiful, and utterly alien. Lieutenant Cross. The voice came from behind him, crisp and melodious despite its formal tone. He turned to find himself face to face with Commander Sailra, and for a moment, his carefully rehearsed diplomatic greeting died in his throat. She was tall and graceful, with pale silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the ship's ambient light. Her features were sharp and elegant, high cheekbones, a narrow nose, and large eyes that shifted from deep violet to pale blue depending on the angle. Her hair, if it could be called that, was more like fine silver filaments that moved with an almost liquid quality around her shoulders. She wore a form-fitting uniform that accentuated her lithe figure, and when she moved it was with a precision that spoke of perfect muscle control. "Commander Sailra," Aaron replied, offering a slight bow that he hoped was appropriate. "Thank you for allowing me aboard your vessel." Her violet blue eyes studied him with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "You are here to facilitate communication between our species during the treaty negotiations. Nothing more." Her accent was barely detectable, but there was something musical about the way she pronounced certain syllables. "I trust you understand the parameters of your assignment." "Of course. I'm here to serve as a cultural and linguistic bridge." "You are here," she interrupted smoothly, "to translate words, not to involve yourself in matters beyond your comprehension." She began walking, her movements fluid and purposeful. "Follow me. I will show you to your quarters." As they moved through the ship's corridors, Aaron found himself stealing glances at her profile. There was something mesmerizing about the way she carried herself, as if every step was calculated for maximum efficiency. Other Varelions they passed nodded respectfully to her, but he noticed how their eyes seemed to avoid direct contact, as if prolonged eye contact might somehow contaminate their emotional equilibrium. "Your people seem very disciplined," Aaron observed, trying to make conversation. "We are logical," Sailra replied without breaking stride. "We do not waste energy on unnecessary emotional displays. Unlike humans, we understand that feelings are simply chemical reactions that serve no productive purpose in advanced civilization." "And yet you have art," Aaron pointed out, gesturing to the beautiful patterns of light flowing along the walls. "Doesn't art require some form of emotional expression?" For the first time, Sailra's perfect composure seemed to falter slightly. She slowed her pace, her eyes following his gesture to the wall patterns. "These are functional. They serve to regulate ship systems and provide necessary illumination. Any aesthetic appeal is merely a byproduct of efficient design." "Is it?" Aaron asked softly, "because from where I'm standing it looks like someone put a lot of thought into making something that could have been purely utilitarian into something beautiful instead." Sailra stopped walking entirely and turned to face him. This close, he could see flecks of silver in her violet eyes, and he caught a hint of something that might have been confusion in her expression. "Beauty is a human concept. We create based on mathematical principles and optimal functionality." "But you do understand the concept well enough to dismiss it," Aaron pointed out, "which suggests you've given it considerable thought." For several seconds they stood in the corridor sizing each other up. Aaron was acutely aware of how different they were. Her cool, calculated perfection against his very human tendency toward warmth and spontaneity. But there was something in her eyes, a flickering curiosity that she was trying very hard to suppress. "Your quarters," she said finally, gesturing to a door panel that lit up at her approach. "You will find everything you need. Tomorrow we begin preparation for the negotiations. I suggest you focus on your linguistic duties and avoid philosophical speculation." The door slid open, revealing a small but elegantly appointed room with the same soft lighting as the corridors. As Aaron stepped inside, he turned back to find Sailra still standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Commander," he said, "I appreciate your directness, but I should probably mention I've always been curious about things that don't make sense, and the idea that a species capable of creating something this beautiful has no understanding of emotion. Well, that doesn't make sense to me." Something flickered across her features, surprise perhaps, or annoyance. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like intrigue. "Good evening, Lieutenant Cross," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I trust you will find your accommodation satisfactory." The door slid shut between them, but Aaron could swear he heard her pause in the corridor outside before her footsteps finally faded away. He looked around his quarters, taking in the subtle curves of the furniture, the way the lighting seemed to respond to his emotional state, growing warmer as he relaxed. For a species that claimed to have no understanding of emotion, the Varelion certainly seemed to have put a lot of thought into creating spaces that made people feel comfortable. 3 days into the negotiations, Aaron found himself spending increasingly long hours with Commander Sailra in the ship's translation center. The diplomatic sessions were complex, requiring careful interpretation of nuanced legal concepts that didn't always have direct equivalents between their languages. What had started as purely professional collaboration was gradually becoming something more. Intimate wasn't the right word, but familiar felt too casual for what was developing between them. The human concept of good faith has no direct translation in our language, Sailra said, her fingers dancing across a holographic display showing linguistic structures. "Our closest equivalent would be logical probability of beneficial outcome, but that lacks the emotional undertones your diplomats seem to find so important." Aaron leaned closer to examine the display, close enough that he could catch a hint of her scent, something clean and faintly metallic like ozone after rain. "That's because good faith isn't really about logic. It's about trust. About believing that the other party wants the agreement to work, even when you can't prove it mathematically." "Trust," Sailra repeated, as if testing the word's weight on her tongue. "Another inefficient concept. Why rely on belief when you can rely on verifiable data?" "Because sometimes the most important things can't be measured," Aaron replied, unconsciously moving closer as he pointed to a section of the translation matrix. "Like the difference between someone who follows a treaty because they're afraid of consequences and someone who follows it because they genuinely want peace." Sailra's hand stilled on the display controls. "And you believe you can sense this difference through emotion? Through intuition? Through reading between the lines?" He gestured to the space between them. "Like right now. I can tell you're genuinely curious about this concept even though you're trying to maintain professional distance. Your posture changed when I mentioned trust. You leaned in slightly, your voice dropped half an octave, and there's this little crease between your eyebrows that appears when you're processing something that challenges your assumptions." For a moment, Sailra went completely still. Then, with deliberate precision, she straightened her posture and smoothed her expression back to neutral. "You are projecting human behaviors onto Varelion physiology. We do not have tells, as you call them." "Don't you?" Aaron asked softly. "Because I've been watching you for 3 days now, and I'm starting to recognize your patterns. Like how your hair moves differently when you're concentrated versus when you're annoyed. Or how your eyes shift more toward blue when you're thinking deeply." Sailra's eyes, currently a deep violet, fixed on his with laser focus. "That is merely a physiological response to different neural activities. It has no bearing on emotional states." "If you say so." Aaron smiled and turned back to the translation work, but he didn't miss the way she surreptitiously touched her hair, as if suddenly self-conscious about its movement. They worked in silence for another hour, the late ship's cycle creating an intimate atmosphere with dimmed lighting that seemed to pulse gently around them. When Sailra reached across him to adjust a display setting, her arm brushed against his shoulder, and he felt her pause, just for a heartbeat, at the contact. "Sailra," he said quietly, not moving away from her proximity. "Can I ask you something personal?" Her hand remained poised over the controls, her body still leaning partially across his space. "Personal questions are not typically appropriate in professional settings. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like To let yourself experience emotion without analyzing it to death? She was close enough that he could see her pulse quickening at the base of her throat, a distinctly non-logical response that she seemed unaware of. I experience sensory input and process it efficiently. That is sufficient. That's not what I asked. His voice was barely above a whisper now. I asked if you'd ever wondered. Sailra's breathing had grown shallow and her eyes were definitely shifting toward blue now. For a long moment they stayed frozen in that position, her leaning over, him looking up at her with open curiosity and something warmer flickering in his expression. Then the translation center's door chimed, and another Varelion officer entered. Sailra straightened immediately, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Commander," the officer said in their musical language, then switched to accented English for Aaron's benefit. "The Council requests an update on translation progress." "Tell them we are proceeding efficiently," Sailra replied, her voice once again perfectly controlled. "We will have preliminary drafts ready by the next cycle." After the officer left, the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. Sailra busied herself with organizing data files, her movements more rigid than usual. "I should return to my quarters," Aaron said finally. "Early session tomorrow." "Yes, that would be logical." But as he gathered his materials, she spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Lieutenant Cross, Aaron." The use of his first name sent a small thrill through him. "The question you asked about wondering." He turned back to her, waiting. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "during meditation cycles my mind wanders to scenarios that have no basis in logic or necessity. I have always assumed this was a flaw in my mental discipline." "What if it's not a flaw?" Aaron asked gently. "What if it's just being alive?" Sailra looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable but her eyes now a clear, bright blue. "That possibility had not occurred to me." As Aaron left the translation center, he caught his reflection in the polished corridor wall and realized he was smiling. Behind him, through the closing door, he could see Sailra still standing where he'd left her, one hand unconsciously pressed to her throat where her pulse had betrayed her so completely. For a species that claimed to be purely logical, she was certainly giving him a lot to think about. The distress signal came during the night cycle, piercing through the synthesis with urgent priority alerts. Aaron woke to find his quarters bathed in pulsing red light, and the sound of Varelion voices speaking rapidly in their native tongue, over the ship's communication system. When he arrived at the command center, still pulling on his uniform jacket, he found controlled chaos. Sailra stood at the central command station, her silver hair seeming to move with electric tension as she coordinated multiple response teams. "What's happening?" Aaron asked, approaching her station. "A diplomatic transport carrying delegates from 3 systems has suffered catastrophic engine failure," she replied without looking away from her displays. "They have perhaps 2 hours of life support remaining. The rescue presents complications." "What kind of complications?" For the first time since he'd known her, Sailra hesitated. "The ship is trapped in a gravity well near an unstable star. Standard rescue protocols would be insufficient. Someone will need to pilot a small craft through the solar radiation and dock manually with their vessel. And the pilot would need a co-pilot familiar with human life support systems, since half the delegates are from Earth colonies." She finally turned to look at him, her eyes a turbulent mix of violet and blue. "I am the most qualified pilot. You are the only human aboard with technical knowledge of their systems." The implication hit him immediately. "You're asking me to come with you on a suicide mission?" "I am not asking," Sailra said carefully. "I am informing you that your expertise may be required. The decision is yours." Aaron looked around the command center, taking in the tense faces of the Varelion crew. He could walk away. He could say it was beyond his mission parameters. But when he looked back at Sailra, he saw something in her expression that she was trying very hard to hide, something that looked almost like fear. Not for herself, but for him. "When do we leave?" he asked. The relief that flickered across her features was so brief he might have imagined it. "Immediately." The rescue craft was sleek and fast, designed for two people working in perfect coordination. As Scielra ran through pre-flight checks, her movements were even more precise than usual, betraying the tension she wouldn't acknowledge aloud. "Aaron," she said as they launched from the synthesis, "you should know that the probability of successfully completing this mission is approximately 37%. "Those aren't great odds," he admitted, watching the unstable star grow larger on their forward display. Solar flares danced across its surface like deadly aurora. "Are you having second thoughts?" "Varelions do not experience doubt," she replied automatically, then paused. "But I find myself concerned about your safety in a way that seems to exceed logical parameters." The admission hung between them as they entered the star's radiation field. The small craft shuddered and bucked as Scielra fought to maintain course, her hands steady on the controls despite the chaos around them. Aaron monitored their shielding and life support, calling out readings as radiation levels climbed to dangerous levels. There, Scielra pointed to a small blip on their scanner. The transport, beginning approach. The next 20 minutes were a blur of precise flying and desperate improvisation. The transport was tumbling slowly, its hull breached in 3 places, life support failing rapidly. Scielra managed an impossible docking maneuver that required her to match the larger ship's rotation while compensating for gravitational shear forces. "Incredible," Aaron breathed, watching her work. "I've never seen piloting like that." "It is merely a matter of calculating multiple variables simultaneously," she said. But there was something almost like pleasure in her voice at his praise. The rescue itself took another hour, transferring 23 delegates through makeshift airlocks, while their own ship's systems strained against the hostile environment. During the final transfer, a solar flare erupted from the star's surface, sending a wave of lethal radiation directly toward them. "Get them aboard, now!" Scielra shouted, abandoning her usual calm as she fought to keep their craft steady. The last delegate, a human woman, was unconscious and had to be carried through the airlock. As Aaron lifted her, the radiation wave hit their shields. The world exploded into light and pain. Aaron felt himself thrown against the bulkhead as their craft spun out of control. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear Scielra's voice, tight with something that sounded remarkably like panic, as she fought to regain control. When his vision cleared, they were clear of the radiation field, limping back toward the synthesis on failing engines. The delegates were safe. Their craft was barely holding together, and Scielra was staring at him with an expression he'd never seen before. "You're bleeding," she said, her voice strangely rough. Aaron touched his forehead and his fingers came away red. "It's nothing, just a cut." But Scielra had already moved from her pilot's seat, kneeling beside him with what looked like genuine distress. "You could have been killed when that radiation wave hit and you fell." She stopped herself as if realizing what she was saying. "But I wasn't," Aaron said gently. "We both made it. We saved them." Scielra was still kneeling beside him, close enough that he could see his reflection in her eyes, now a deep, warm blue. "When I saw you fall," she whispered, "I experienced something I have never felt before. A wrongness. As if the universe had suddenly become fundamentally unbalanced." "Scielra, I do not understand it," she continued, her voice barely audible. "But the thought of losing you caused me actual pain, physical pain here." She pressed her hand to her chest over her heart. Without thinking, Aaron reached up and covered her hand with his own. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through both of them, and he saw her breath catch. "That's what fear feels like," he said, softly. "Fear of losing someone who matters to you. Someone who matters?" She looked confused, as if the concept were foreign to her. "Yes." He shifted slightly, bringing them closer together. "Someone you care about." For a long moment, they stayed like that, her kneeling beside him, their hands pressed together over her heart, which was beating much faster than any Varelian should in a moment of calm. Then, with a movement that seemed to surprise them, both, Scielra leaned down and pressed her forehead against his. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way that transcended physical attraction. "I care about you," she whispered, the words seeming to shock her even as she spoke them. "I care about you, and I do not know how to stop." Aaron lifted his free hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her cheekbone. "Maybe you don't have to stop. Maybe caring about someone isn't a weakness. My people would say otherwise." "What do you say?" She was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face as if memorizing every detail. Finally, she spoke, her voice filled with wonder and something that might have been hope. "I say that when I thought I might lose you today, logic meant nothing. All that mattered was bringing you home safely." She paused, her breath warm against his skin. Perhaps there are some things more important than efficiency. As their damaged craft docked with the synthesis, neither of them moved from their position on the floor. For the first time in her life, Sailra had discovered something more compelling than duty. And for the first time since arriving on the Varelion ship, Aaron felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The medical bay of the synthesis was a marvel of Varelion biotechnology, but as Aaron lay unconscious on the biobed, surrounded by softly pulsing diagnostic equipment, it felt more like a tomb to Sailra. 3 days had passed since the mining station incident. 3 days since she had watched him throw himself between a collapsing support beam and a group of trapped workers. 3 days since she had seen his broken body pulled from the debris. The Varelion medical team had done what they could, but his injuries were severe. Internal bleeding, spinal trauma, neurological damage from oxygen deprivation. By all logical assessments, his chances of full recovery were minimal. Sailra had not left his side. "Commander," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Dr. Thanel, the ship's chief medical officer, approaching with what appeared to be reluctance. "I must speak with you about the human's condition." "His name is Aaron," Sailra said quietly, her hand resting near his on the biobed. She had been careful not to actually touch him, not with the medical staff constantly monitoring, not when such contact would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. "Yes, Aaron." Dr. Thanel's tone carried a note of disapproval that made Sailra's spine stiffen. "Commander, I am concerned about your attachment to this patient. You have been here for 72 hours without rest. This behavior is highly irregular. The human Aaron is under my protection as a diplomatic guest. His recovery is a matter of treaty importance." "Is it?" Dr. Thanel moved closer, his pale eyes studying her with clinical intensity. "Or is this about something else entirely? Your biometric readings have been unusual since his injury. Elevated stress hormones, irregular neural patterns, symptoms consistent with what humans call emotional distress." Sailra felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the medical bay's controlled temperature. "I am monitoring a critical situation. My elevated awareness is appropriate to the circumstances." "Commander," Dr. Thanel's voice dropped to a whisper, "I have run detailed scans on your neural chemistry over the past several days. The changes in your brain structure are consistent with emotional bonding, what humans call attachment. You are exhibiting symptoms of contamination." The word hit her like a physical blow. Contamination. In Varelion society, it was one of the worst diagnoses possible. The corruption of logical thought processes by primitive emotional responses. Varelions who showed signs of contamination were typically removed from service and subjected to neural reconditioning. "That is impossible," Sailra said, but her voice lacked conviction even to her own ears. "Is it? When was the last time you made a decision based purely on logic? When was the last time you didn't consider how that decision might affect him?" Dr. Thanel gestured toward Aaron's still form. "You violated 3 separate protocols during the mining station rescue. You put the entire mission at risk to ensure his safety. That is not logical behavior, Commander." Sailra's hand moved unconsciously, closer to Aaron's, and she caught herself just before making contact. The gesture was not lost on Dr. Thanel. "I am going to recommend to the Council that you be relieved of duty pending psychological evaluation," he said, not unkindly. "This contamination can be treated, Commander. You can be restored to proper function. And if I refuse treatment? Doctor. Thanel's expression grew somber. Then you will be classified as irreversibly compromised. You know what that means. Exile. Permanent separation from Varelion society. The loss of everything she had worked for, everything she was. After Dr. Thanel left, Sailora stood alone in the medical bay, staring down at Aaron's peaceful face. His breathing was steady now, the biomonitors showing gradual improvement, but he still hadn't awakened. The medical team estimated it could be days before he regained consciousness, if he ever did. For the first time in her adult life, Sailora found herself faced with a choice that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with what she wanted. She could accept treatment, return to her former life, forget these strange new feelings that had taken root in her chest. Or she could choose this, choose him, and accept the consequences. As if summoned by her thoughts, Aaron's eyelids fluttered, open. His gaze was unfocused at first, but when it found her face, he managed a weak smile. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough from the breathing apparatus he'd been on. "You look terrible." A sound escaped her that was part laugh, part sob, an entirely illogical response that she didn't even try to suppress. "You nearly died," she said, finally allowing herself to touch his hand. "You threw yourself into danger without thought for your own safety. It was completely irrational." "Yeah, well," Aaron squeezed her fingers weakly. "I learned from the best. Besides, those workers had families, children. How could I let them die when I could prevent it? Because it was not your responsibility. Because your life has value too." The words came out more intensely than she had intended, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Sailora," he said softly. "What's wrong? And don't tell me nothing. You look like you're about to face a firing squad." She told him everything. About Dr. Thanel's diagnosis, about the council's likely response, about the choice she now faced. As she spoke, she watched his expression grow increasingly troubled. "So let me get this straight," he said when she finished. "Your people want to basically lobotomize you because you've developed the capacity to feel? It is more complex than that." "No, it isn't." His grip on her hand tightened, despite his weakened state. "Sailora, what you're feeling isn't contamination. It's growth. It's becoming more than what you were." "My people would disagree." "Then maybe your people are wrong." He struggled to sit up, and she helped him, acutely aware of the warmth of his body against her hands. "You saved those workers because you understood something your medical officer doesn't. That efficiency isn't everything. That sometimes the illogical choice is the right choice. The council will never accept that reasoning. Then don't give them the chance." Aaron's eyes were intense now, fully focused despite his injuries. "Come with me. When this diplomatic mission ends, come back to Earth. You don't have to choose between feeling and thinking. Humans do both every day. Leave everything I have ever known. My career, my people, my entire life. For what? To become who you really are instead of who they programmed you to be?" Sailora was quiet for a long time, absorbing his words. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of choosing you and discovering I am not brave enough to live with the consequences." Aaron lifted their joined hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the first truly intimate contact they had shared. The gesture sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "You're the bravest person I know," he said against her skin. "You've already chosen, Sailora. The moment you decided to sit by my bedside for 3 days, the moment you risked everything to save me, the moment you allowed yourself to feel, you chose. Now you just have to decide if you're brave enough to live with that choice." As if in response to his words, the medical bay door chimed, and Dr. Thanel entered with 2 council security officers. "Commander Sailora," Dr. Thanel said formally, "by order of the High Council, you are to report for immediate psychological evaluation and treatment." Sailora looked at the security officers, then at Aaron, who was watching her with complete trust in his eyes. She thought about the life she had known, ordered, logical, empty. Then she thought about the past few weeks, chaotic, confusing, but more alive than she had ever felt. "No," she said simply. Dr. Thanel blinked in surprise. "Commander?" I said no. I refused treatment. She stood, positioning herself between Aaron and the security officers. "I choose to remain as I am." "Commander, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." Her voice carried the authority of her rank, even as she prepared to lose it forever. "I am choosing to feel. I am choosing to love. And I am choosing him." The security officers moved forward, but Saelra raised her hand. "I will come with you willingly, but I will not submit to reconditioning. Prepare the charges. I formally request a hearing before the full council." As they led her away, she looked back at Aaron one last time. He was struggling to get out of the biobed despite his injuries, calling her name, but she shook her head. "Trust me," she said, her eyes now a brilliant, unwavering blue. "I know what I'm doing." For the first time in her life, Saelra was about to fight for something that couldn't be quantified or calculated, something that existed purely in the realm of the heart. The council chamber of the synthesis was a perfect circle of crystalline walls that seemed to extend infinitely upward, creating the impression of standing at the bottom of a vast well of stars. 12 Varelion counselors sat in elevated positions around the perimeter, their expressions as cold and unchanging as the space between worlds. In the center, Saelra stood alone, her hands bound with energy restraints that pulsed with soft blue light. She had been stripped of her uniform and rank insignia, dressed now in the simple gray garment of one awaiting judgment. But her spine was straight, her chin raised, and her eyes, still that defiant blue, showed no trace of regret. "Commander Saelra," intoned Counselor Prime Velteran, his voice echoing from the chamber walls, "you stand accused of emotional contamination, dereliction of duty, and willful rejection of psychological treatment. How do you answer these charges?" "I answer them with pride," Saelra replied, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "I have discovered something your sterile logic cannot quantify, the power of choosing to care for another being more than you care for yourself." Ripple of disapproval moved through the assembled counselors. Veltaran's pale eyes narrowed. "You speak of contamination as if it were achievement. You have allowed primitive emotional responses to corrupt your reasoning capacity. You are no longer Varelion in any meaningful sense." "Am I not?" Saelra lifted her chin higher. "I led the rescue mission that saved 23 diplomatic delegates. I successfully completed every translation protocol assigned to me. I maintained the safety and security of this vessel through 3 separate crisis situations. Tell me, Counselor Prime, which of these accomplishments was diminished by my capacity to feel? Your emotional attachment led you to take unnecessary risks," countered Counselor Thys from across the chamber. "You violated protocol repeatedly to ensure the human's safety. This demonstrates compromised judgment." "Does it? Or does it demonstrate expanded judgment?" Saelra turned to address the speaker directly. "When I saved Lieutenant Cross during the mining station collapse, I also saved 5 other beings who would have died if I had followed standard evacuation protocols. When I chose to sit vigil during his recovery, I learned more about human physiology and psychology than months of academic study could have taught me. My so-called contamination made me more effective, not less." "Impossible," Dr. Thanel spoke from his position as witness. "Emotional responses are by definition irrational. They cannot improve performance, cannot they?" The new voice came from the chamber entrance, and every head turned to see Aaron Cross walking slowly into the space, supported by a medical mobility device but clearly determined to be present. "Counselors, I request permission to speak on behalf of Commander Saelra." "You have no standing in this proceeding," Veltaran said coldly. "You are not Varelion." "No, I'm not, but I am the subject of her supposed contamination, and I have relevant testimony to offer." Aaron made his way to the center of the chamber, positioning himself beside Saelra. She looked at him with surprise, and something that might have been alarm. Aaron, you should not be here. Your injuries are healing thanks to you. He turned back to the council. Honorable counselors, you speak of emotion as if it were a disease, but what I've witnessed in Commander Sailra over the past weeks is evolution. She hasn't become less than what she was. She's become more. The human's opinion is irrelevant, Counselor Thiss interjected. He lacks the perspective to understand what has been lost. What has been lost? Aaron's voice rose, filling the chamber with passionate intensity. She still possesses every analytical skill she ever had. She can still calculate hyperspace trajectories, negotiate complex treaties, and pilot a ship through impossible conditions. But now she can also recognize when those skills should serve something greater than mere efficiency. He gestured toward Sailra, his eyes never leaving the assembled counselors. When she risked herself to save those miners, she wasn't being irrational. She was choosing to value life over statistical probabilities. When she refused to leave my bedside, she wasn't being inefficient. She was demonstrating a level of commitment that your cold logic could never inspire. You speak of commitment, Veltaran said, his tone dismissive. But emotional bonds are temporary. They fade, they change, they cause pain. Logic is eternal. Is it? Sailra spoke now, her voice steady and clear. Counselor Prime, how long have you served on this council? 47 years. And in all that time, what have you created that will outlast you? What have you built that has meaning beyond mere function? She looked around the chamber, meeting each counselor's gaze in turn. You call yourselves the pinnacle of evolution, but you are stagnant. You create nothing. Build nothing, inspire nothing. You exist, but you do not live. We maintain order, Counselor Thiss said stiffly. We preserve our civilization. Do you? When was the last time a Varelion composed music, created art, wrote poetry? When was the last time one of us made a choice, based on hope rather than calculation? Sailra's voice grew stronger with each word. You haven't preserved our civilization. You've embalmed it. Enough. Veltaran's voice cracked like a whip through the chamber. You have proven our point. Your emotional contamination has led you to reject everything our people have achieved. You are no longer fit to exist among us. Then I choose exile, Sailra said without hesitation. I choose to leave this sterile perfection and discover what it means to truly live. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Even among Varelions facing contamination charges, choosing exile over treatment was almost unheard of. You would abandon everything, Dr. Thanel said, and for the first time his clinical detachment seemed shaken. Your people, your career, your identity, all for the fleeting satisfaction of emotional experience? I would abandon the illusion of perfection for the reality of growth, Sailra replied. I would trade the certainty of stagnation for the possibility of becoming something new. Aaron stepped closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You don't have to do this alone, he said quietly. If you choose exile, choose it with me. We can build something together. Something that combines the best of both our peoples. Sailra looked at him, this human who had somehow cracked open the shell she had built around her heart. Are you asking me to bond with you, Aaron Cross? I'm asking you to marry me, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. I'm asking you to spend whatever time we have learning how to be better together than we ever could be apart. The blue in her eyes deepened until it seemed to glow with inner light. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I choose you. I choose love. I choose the beautiful uncertainty of a life lived with an open heart. Veltaran rose from his seat, his expression thunderous. Then you are no longer Varelion. You are exiled from this ship, from our space, from our people. You will have 1 hour to gather your possessions before departure. Counselor Prime, Aaron interjected. With respect, I think you're making a mistake. Commander Sailra represents the future of your people, the possibility of growth beyond your current limitations. In exiling her, you're not protecting your civilization. You're condemning it to slow death. The human's opinion is noted and dismissed, Veltarin said coldly. This proceeding is concluded. As the council began to file out, Selra felt the energy restraints around her wrists dissolve. She flexed her fingers, then reached out to take Aaron's hand. The contact sent the now familiar warmth flooding through her, but this time she didn't try to analyze or suppress it. She simply felt it, accepted it, treasured it. "Are you certain about this?" she asked him quietly. "I am about to become a person without a people, without a home. I can offer you nothing but myself." Aaron lifted their joined hands and pressed, her palm against his chest over his heart. "That's everything I want," he said simply. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." An hour later, as their small transport ship departed the synthesis, Selra watched her former home grow smaller in the view screen. She felt no regret, no second thoughts, only anticipation for the unknown future stretching ahead of them. "So," Aaron said from the pilot's seat, "where would you like to go first? Earth? One of the colony worlds? We could explore the outer rim, see what's out there." Selra moved to stand behind his chair, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. "Wherever we go," she said, "we go together. That is all the destination I need." As their ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward whatever adventures awaited, Selra realized she had finally learned the difference between existing and living. Logic had given her survival, but love, messy, inefficient, gloriously unpredictable love, had given her life. And for the first time in her existence, she understood that some things were too precious to be quantified, too beautiful to be analyzed, too important to be anything but felt with the full intensity of an open heart. "I love you, Aaron Cross," she whispered against his ear, the words still strange and wonderful on her tongue. "I love you too, Selra," he replied, leaning back into her embrace. "And I can't wait to see what we become." "I love you too, Selra," he replied, leaning back into her embrace. "And I can't wait to see what we become." Behind them, the synthesis continued on its ordered path through the stars, carrying its cargo of perfect, logical, utterly empty souls. Ahead lay the infinite possibility of a universe where two hearts had chosen to beat as one, where logic and love had learned to dance together, where the future was unwritten and therefore limitless. It was, Selra reflected with something that might have been wonder, the most beautiful inefficiency she could imagine.